Welcome back. I want to continue with the Great War. By 1917, the situation on the Eastern Front, on the Russian front, is deteriorating. People have lost confidence in the Tsar's leadership. The Russian army is falling apart. Russian soldiers are throwing their weapons down, turning east, and walking back to their villages. The Russian war effort is beginning to break up. The average Russian soldier quite often gets his ammunition, weapons, food, water, boots from the dead Germans in front of him. His own government is increasingly incapable of supplying him. And remember, by 1917, that huge sort of western swath of Russia is occupied by the Germans. And this is where most of Russian industry is located. So the war is becoming a disaster for the Russians. Now, the war on the Western Front, as we talked about in the last lecture, remains immobile, static, both armies stuck in their trenches. The German High Command has an idea. They're going to roll the dice on something that's it seems remote and even outrageous. They're aware that there's a Russian communist, an intellectual, a troublemaker, whom we'll talk about in some detail later. His name is Vladimir Lenin, and he's living in Switzerland, of all places. And there he publishes this left-wing or communist paper. The German High Command sees that the Russian political leadership is in disarray, and the war effort there is coming apart. So they approach Lenin, and they make him an offer he can't refuse. They tell him that they will take him back to Russia, to St. Petersburg, on the Baltic, and let him go free there to work his mischief. What the German High Command is hoping is that Lenin, whose lifelong ambition is to overthrow the Tsar and establish a communist state in Russia, is that he will cause political trouble and perhaps disrupt further the Russian war effort. Lenin is indeed taken to St. Petersburg in April of 1917. And he begins organizing and begins campaigning. His slogan, and we'll talk about this in more detail when we talk about the revolution itself. His slogan is peace, land, and bread. We'll describe that in a few minutes. And of course, the Russian Revolution takes place in October 1917. So it took Lenin 6 months. Of course, there are other factors here, but in 6 months after arriving in Russia, Lenin is in control of Russia, and will very shortly thereafter withdraw Russia from the war, sign a treaty with the Germans, and create the Soviet Union. So the German High Command has just rolled the dice on this, and they won. Now, with Russia withdrawing from the war, the German High Command begins to bring all those millions of German troops on the Eastern Front back to the Western Front for one last effort, one last push to defeat the Allies, the British and the French. Now, let's go back to April 1917. As Lenin arrives in Russia and begins this process of taking Russia out of the war, another, even more deadly combatant is going to enter the war. The German Navy had been using submarines to attack Allied shipping in the Atlantic. The Lusitania is probably the most famous of these ships that was sunk. Americans were on board. The American president protested. The Germans apologized and said it wouldn't happen again. But now it's 1917, and the Germans see their opportunity. As Russia weakens and the Germans bring their troops back to the Western Front, they see an opportunity to win this war. So they resume unlimited submarine warfare, again trying to starve England out of the war. England, being an island nation, brings food and energy supplies and a variety of things to sustain the population. And these U-boats are designed to stop that. So they resume this unlimited submarine warfare. By April of 1917, this had reached the point where the American president, Wilson, didn't see any choice any longer. He asked for a declaration of war from the United States Congress, and he got it. So now picture this. The Russians are leaving the war in the east, but in the west, the United States is entering the war. So these massive Russian assaults on the Western Front in 1918, in the summer and fall, although they make progress and they do push the Allied lines back, ultimately they're unsuccessful. And the German war effort will come to an end on November the 11th day of the 11th month, I think at the 11th hour even. Germany surrenders, and the fighting in the Great War comes to a close. Now, in our next segment, I want to talk about the settlement of the war, and this is really the most important aspect of the Great War, is what the winners do with their victory. The map of Europe is going to be redrawn. The map of the Middle East is going to be redrawn. I mentioned in our opening lecture that the great empires of Europe are going to be destroyed. The Russian, the Ottoman, the German, and the Austro-Hungarian. These empires are going to be dismantled, and in their place we're going to find new, small, weak countries. These, of course, are the seeds of the Second World War. So we'll talk about Versailles in some detail, and I think once we finish with Versailles, you'll get some notion of how that peace treaty laid the foundation for an even more terrible war 20 years later. Thank you.